Hi, everyone. We've got some folks hopping online right now. It's good to see you all. Jake, looks like I've got you on the line.
I am on the line, yes.
Wonderful. Hi there. How are you today?
Awesome. And I've got my sweet gamer glasses that block the blue light from my screen, keep my brain healthy.
Nice. Awesome. That's fantastic. I think that's probably something we all need to invest in now.
$17 on Amazon.
That's what I've heard. Yep. Good investment there. All right. Excellent. Well, it's just before 2 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and let folks hop on board and we'll go ahead and get started here in a minute. Just needed to close the office door so as not to be a nuisance. All right, so it's 2 o'clock now. We'll go ahead and just give it maybe like a minute or two because I see people still trickling in. So we'll go ahead and give it maybe 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. But at the very least, I'll introduce myself right now. My name is Brown. I'm the Director of Member Engagement for the Reno Sparks Chamber. I just want to welcome you all here today. I know some of you have probably already been on one of these calls previously, so you kind of know the drill. But when it comes to these Ask the Expert calls, what we like to do is have some prepared Q&A that has come in from our members or from our staff ahead of time and have our expert address those questions first. And then for the end of the call, we're opening it up to whatever you folks have on your mind. So if you come up with a question at any point during the call, go ahead and ask it in chat and we will try and get to it after the call concludes. We do like to keep these calls just to a half an hour just to honor everyone's time and make sure, since you've got so many of these meetings going on, that that everyone isn't getting too zoomed out, since it seems as though Zoom is going to be part of our future moving forward for a long period of time. So again, it's about 2:02 right now, so I might just give it 1 more minute to see if anyone else hops on, and then we'll get started.
And Christina, thanks for that. I have blocked the whole hour, so if people just have extra time, I'll stay on as long as necessary. This is important, and I think it's just important and worth, to honor the topic. It's worth staying on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. So if you didn't hear that, if you just hopped on and didn't catch that, Jake has offered to stay on the line past our typical half-hour time in order to answer whatever questions you have, especially since the subject matter warrants it, since we're talking about our kiddos. So thank you, Jake, for doing that for us and for our members. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So Jake, I was going to introduce you, but I think I'll just let you introduce yourself to everyone.
I hate doing the verbal resume. So marriage and family therapist by trade. I co-own and operate Zephyr Wellness, which is an outpatient mental health practice in Northern Nevada. We are headquartered on Cheney Street off Wells, but then we have a Sparks location also. Those are our 2 brick and mortars. And then we do work in Pershing County, have historically been in Lyon and Carson, and work with the Washoe County School District, and we're the clinical services provider for Safe Embrace. And we have lots of partnerships, both formal and informal, across the community. And we've been in business for about 5 years now, chamber member for almost 2, and happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We're very happy that you were able to take time out of your day especially juggling working and, having the kids with you. Thank you for taking this time this afternoon. So we'll just go ahead and jump in and kind of get a lay of the land by, asking a general question first. So what are some of the, encouraging trends you've seen, but also the troubling trends that you've seen when it comes to kids' mental health amid the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, one of the advantages I have of running an agency of this size is that although I myself am diminished in my own client capacity, I have 18 other or 17 other clinicians who are seeing them. So what I did is I texted a bunch of people and I was like, hey, what are you guys seeing? Mm-hmm. And there are some emerging themes. So I'm going to start with the negative first because I always like to end on positive. So negatively, there seems to be more tension, more arguing. I don't know if anybody's aware, but we've definitely seen an uptick of domestic violence calls. Washoe County in month of March, year over year, to Domestic Violence Resource Center saw a 64% increase, I believe, and then Safe Embrace saw a 72% increase in calls for service. That was March. We haven't gotten April's numbers yet. Parental strife, there seems to be an increased apathy toward learning, not education necessarily, but just learning. There's kind of a so what that's happening because of the atmosphere. An interesting over-reliance on government to feed / contain / raise our children. I think parents are getting frustrated because a lot of them maybe undervalued what was going on in the classroom setting, and now we all have a brand new appreciation for what our teachers do. So that's been interesting to see. So amidst the frustration of not being able to just send our kids off, that's the counter side is like now we're more appreciative. One thing that stands out consistently is that products of divorce, children who are products of divorce, have been limited in seeing their other parents due to the restrictions and the shelter-in-place order. So parents have kept their kids away from grandparents as well in order to avoid contamination. I did that with my own children. It was heartbreaking for both parties. Somebody remarked that the situation might be a precursor for custodial battles and increased family distress as we emerge from the COVID-19 lockdown and orders. Increased systemic dysfunction, which directly correlates with the negative outcome for children's mental health and the behavioral acting out. Parents are reporting an increase of symptoms and behavioral problems, which is to be expected. And then we're seeing an interesting emergence of children who are becoming more parentified, meaning they're taking on the role of the parents as parents have to work from home, or they're just busy caring for other things in life. So when your kids aren't there, they don't have that role. They're free to be children at school and on the playground in the neighborhood. Now everybody's been compelled to do this thing from home, absent the educational environment. The older siblings are now taking on more of a parenting role. And then the final thing that I think is worth talking about, because as a family systems focused entity, we are seeing an emergence of children who have particularly problematic behaviors as a direct reflection of parents who have problematic behaviors. So the more highly anxious the parents are, it trickles down to the children, and that's presenting in our sessions. Now, onto the more encouraging stuff, we're actually seeing educationally, we're seeing less of a focus on testing and more on information. So you're going to find some a flip side to this coin as I go through these. The negatives are balanced by positives of the exact same nature in a lot of respects. So, we're finding more time spent on relationships, which is very cool. Resiliency, it was commented by at least 4 people I texted. The resiliency of the children is very, very telling. I think sometimes we undersell our children's ability to recover from things, and we tend to over pathologize. And my kid experienced this thing, poor thing is never going to recover, and that's just simply not true. So we're seeing this resilience and how malleable they are to change. The change in the school and home routines, staying away from friends and stuff, but they still managed to come to session laughing, playing, wanting to learn, and even in session they're excited to try new games and interactions and so forth. So they're appropriately using social media, they're appropriately using Zoom to stay connected with parents, and they're finding internal motivation to do things instead of the external motivation traditionally found from the school and the parents. So the difference between internal and external motivation might sound obvious, but for those who are not knowledgeable, internal comes from within one's own personal desire to do something. External is mandated from without. So, the teacher says, do your homework, as opposed to the children going, I want to do my homework because I know that it'll benefit me. We're seeing more emergence of internal motivation, which is great. So along with that, they seem to be faring better than the adult clients. The adult clients are the ones who are intaking all the information through news media, social media, neighbors, friends, and the children just simply aren't exposed to that, which is really great. So without their parents' influence, based on our clinicians' interactions, the trends, the troubling trends would probably be much less apparent. One anecdotal experience stands out. There's a 5-year-old child of one of my clinicians ceased having nightmares, as well as the symptomatic behaviors that prompted her parents to seek treatment in the first place, because she had the stability in her environment, because she's a product of a divorce, and the exchange was not happening. So that's the flip side of that coin. Some children are very troubled that they can't see both parents, and some are actually better off being in a stable environment. So that's all to say that it depends.
Right. No, absolutely. Wow, that is fascinating. And yet not surprising to hear that, with a lot of these trends, they're often two sides of the same coin, that there is, a drawback to certain circumstances we're living with, and there's also a positive. So thank you for laying that out so perfectly there. I have one quick follow-up question when it comes to some of perhaps the more aggressive behaviors, or even relational tension within households, and that kids are experiencing with each other, perhaps in the family unit. That aggression and some of those signs, in your opinion, are those more secondary effects of something else that's going on internally for kids?
Yeah, the way that we conceptualize things, or the way that I teach it, and I know there's various debates about this, but one that we found works really well is that you don't have a standalone behavior. And what I encourage in my clinicians, the fledgling ones as well as the licensed interns all the way up to fully licensed and supervised, is see through people's outward behaviors and into the inner soul of the human on the inside. And what is troubling there gives rise to the outward symptomatic presentation. So, for example, to say somebody's being violent, a kid on the playground is bullying other kids. He didn't come out of the womb that way. He learned it somewhere and learned it as a coping skill to deal with something much deeper, right? So in our world, we have to stick within the confines of the DSM-5 now. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And that's where we get our codes for billing insurance and our common language among clinicians. And what we do is we hit diagnostic criteria based on outward observable symptom presentation. The DSM gives us very little insight as to how these things come about, because that's very individual. So this child who's terrorizing children on the playground might be suffering some issue at home, might have a lack of sense of self-efficacy or self-worth, might just never learn to tolerate emotional distress. So treating the symptom, we found, is effective. We can get kids to stop punching other kids. We can get them to stop throwing dirt. We can take their sticks away. But if we don't address the underlying root problem to the leaves, so to speak, to maintain the metaphor, more leaves grow back. And so the hitting turns into yelling and screaming. We hear the yelling and screaming, it turns into a withdrawal. We hear the withdrawal, it turns into refusal to do homework. So what we end up doing is we play therapeutic whack-a-mole with the symptoms, because we haven't addressed the underlying issue. You want to get rid of the weed in your yard, you uproot it. You don't just keep trimming the leaves. So yes is the short answer to your question. There's always something deeper to find out. And once you hit that thing, and you can address that thing, which is often family systemic in nature, then you find the symptoms just disappear. And you don't have to chase them around in a circle anymore.
Right. And that's a perfect segue into the next question, which involves warning signs. What kinds of, behaviors, we've, just talked about aggression. What other kinds of warning signs should we be looking for with our kids right now?
The chief, I guess, guidepost that you want is a significant deviation from expected behavior. So we don't want to say deviation from normal, and those of you not on video can't see my air quotes, but I'm putting air quotes in. Whatever is quote unquote normal, we just want to get rid of that language altogether, because who knows what normal is. Normal for one family is not the same for another. So what has been expected over time is what we want to look at. If your child is B student, regularly participates in activities, doesn't give you any problems, eats his vegetables, whatever. Any deviation from that that is significant and sustained over time, right? So this is really important to pay attention to. This sustained over time. Now, how much time? That's up for debate. We can say it's a week, it's a few days, it's a month, whatever. But that's all individualized. But we want to look at significant change. If the kid suddenly stops having an interest in eating dinner with the family and isolates at home, and has never done that before, that's alarming. And if it happens one night because he got in a fight with his friend, that's called life, and we don't pathologize that. But if it happens repeatedly, 3, 4 nights in a row, we want to start paying attention to that. So in science, they use the delta to signify change. We want to look at the delta of what's going on. Excessive weight gain, weight loss, isolation, violence, outbursts, withdrawal, any of those things that look like that's not my kid, and it's not better accounted for by hormones, adolescence, natural growth and development. That's what you want to pay attention to, and that would be a good indicator to start having a conversation about, hey, what's going on, buddy? I've seen this change in you. And then maybe it's something that's easily explainable, or maybe it's ongoing stress of a different nature that needs to be addressed.
Right. Absolutely. And thank you very much for putting a little bit of framework in there when it comes to age specificity as well, which, for in some ways things are going to present differently depending on, the age of our kids. But in some ways, we're going to express things similarly when we're 5 and when we're 55. And
Sure.
so, some of those factors are a little bit more constant. But did you have anything else to note on age specificity when it comes to those warning signs?
Yeah, I think separate and apart from age-specific presentations, I think what is implied in what I just said is that you know your kid, and that can be very frightening to some people to go, I don't know, holy cow, I haven't actually started paying attention to my kid until I was forced into this compulsory quarantine. And that in and of itself is problematic. And I just want to spend a little bit of time hovering here because I think it's going to come up later. Emotional functioning is of critical importance for human beings walking the earth. If you know well how your emotions work and you can tolerate them and experience them fully and know that on the other side of the emotional experience, life goes on and the world doesn't spin off its axis, what that begets is an invited intimacy to other people's worlds, including your own children. But if you're avoiding your own emotions and you're trying to suppress or stuff down or avoid or bail out, you're not going to be real eager to become vulnerable in the presence of another person, and then you're not going to be real eager to go find out somebody else's vulnerabilities, including your own children. So if you're just operating as a family in a bunch of orbs bumping into each other from time to time and not actually connecting as human beings, what you'll end up doing is turning around much too far after the horse has left the barn and going, holy cow, my kid's suicidal, we got to get him into treatment. And the interview with somebody like me goes something to the effect of, when did you notice what you noticed and how did it start? And it's like, well, 3 months ago. And it's like, well, what happened? Usually what happens is we're just so absorbed with what's going on at work or in the news or chasing down, finances or whatever it is, that we just kind of forgot. And that happens to every family, and it's expected. It's not okay. I don't want to say it's okay. We don't want to neglect our children, but this may be a time where we encourage participation in our own kids' lives so that we can tell when their behavioral patterns start deviating from what's expected, and it doesn't hit us like a wet sack of flour down the road.
Right. Incredibly wise. And I want to echo, especially in my experience, how, being connected to myself and knowing myself just only enhances the ability to know and identify, to be observant and curious about what's going on with other people. And it sounds like, that continues to be the name of the game: checking in with self, checking in with others, and wash and repeat. That's a great pattern if it's not already established in family life, to get it established now. So thank you for that. So keeping with that topic of age specificity, can you share some age appropriate ways for kids to handle being socially distanced?
I think that a lot of the questions that are coming up these days have to do with like this perception that somehow life is fundamentally different now than it was 4 months ago. And I don't know that it was. I don't even know if life is fundamentally different than it was 35 years ago when I was a child fumbling my way through, you know, social interactions. So if you as parents know what you're doing and you have a parental philosophy, and every time I say parental philosophy, people's hearts leap into their throat. They're like, I should have one. Um, then the same matrix or the same rubric that you would overlay in any decision that you would make for a kid, whether it be 1987 or 2020, would still apply. So what's age appropriate for a child who's 5 years old or 3 years old, like my two are, should be age appropriate outside of COVID as well as inside. I'm not going to let them just randomly log into my account on Netflix and start watching TV. That would be weird because I don't have a Netflix account. So that example aside, I might put something on and I'll monitor it. I'll watch it, right? I'll make sure that I vet the content first. Peppa Pig appears to be okay, except my kid is now speaking a British accent. I can deal with that. I don't know that I want to turn him loose on PewDiePie. So we want to monitor and we want to be reasonably engaged in our kids' lives. Again, it comes back to the parents. That all said, if you're trying to get your kids together through the media that we have, go ahead and make sure that you understand it yourself, and then make sure you're monitoring it. It's the same rules would apply anyway. It's a very rambling non-answer to a question. I wish I had a formulaic list to give, but I don't.
I think that's great, because in some ways there's perhaps a too heightened an awareness of how different and how changed everything is, when it's good that there are areas where we need to take a step back and acknowledge, nope, we're the same. There are still some things that are very much the same in terms of what we're experiencing, how we're parenting, and that we don't. There are some things we don't need to overthink. So I think that that's actually quite encouraging. So that leads pretty well into the next question, which has to do with screen time, and how ironic it is that we've spent so much contemporary focus on screen time for kids, only to now find ourselves in a position where we are relying on screens for education, for socialization, all sorts of things. So what should we be doing in terms of monitoring screen time, and have the rules changed?
I'm not sure we knew what the rules were to begin with. I know we had this overarching theme of watch your kids' screen time and make sure they're not being on the screen, right? In fact, there's a really excellent documentary filmed and produced by a pediatrician up in Washington State, I believe is where she lives, and it's called Screenagers. And then Screenagers Part 2 came out, and I had the privilege of being on a panel at Spanish Springs High School for a screening of Screenagers, and it was exceptional. Both parts are absolutely exceptional. If you can get your hands on it, I think every parent should watch it. That being said, my favorite word in the entire counseling profession is intentionality. And it's the spirit of knowing why you do what you do, being purposeful, being intent on, whatever it is. So what is the intentionality behind limiting screen time? Answer that and you'll have your answer. Now, Healthy Washoe has the 5210 metric that, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It's 5 fruits and vegetables per day, no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time, 1 hour of play outside activity, something that involves movement, and then 0 sugary drinks and more water. So the 2 hours of screen time in there is recreational screen time. And I think if we start to define what screen time is in terms of beneficial versus detrimental, now we can have a debate. So if we move everybody online with their classes and we go, screen time. Well, what is it about screen time? If it's productive screen time, you're going to school, you're doing things. I don't see the problem with that. If you're wasting away on the couch, Cheeto fingered with sticky buttons on your PlayStation controller hours on end, that's probably not productive, because a whole array of things can befall a person for doing that. So if we're monitoring screen time, we want to definitely keep in mind the 2 hours of recreational screen time. But what's emerged is that the kids actually get sick of the screen. They actually are starting to want to play more outside. They're getting more creative in their other activities. They're inventing things on their own. They're kind of just tired of sitting still, engaged in the screen, because you don't have recess anymore. And yes, I know teachers are getting them up, getting them out of their chairs, doing stuff. It's not the same. You just need decomposed granite under your shoes sometimes, And so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Again, don't overthink it. Don't pathologize something that doesn't need to be pathologized. And mind your intentionality. If you're gonna issue an order, make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing. That's all.
That's great. Thank you for that. I'm just going to pause really quickly on our prepared questions just to remind everyone. If you have a question that's coming up for yourself, go ahead and put it in chat. And I think with this subject, it's worthy to note that you do have the option of asking a question privately. You can either send a question privately to me, or you can send a question privately to Jake, if you don't want everyone on the call to see what your question is. So I just wanted to throw that out there, remind everyone that is out there to take advantage of it. And we'll go ahead and resume with our prepared questions. So the next thing that I think is going to be a big question, especially depending on how long it takes for certain social distancing guidelines to either extend or be relaxed. And of course, differences in opinion amongst families on when and how to relax some of those social distancing guidelines. What are some ways that we can help our kids cope with being apart, physically apart from their friends and from their peers?
So it seems hairier than it is, I think. And again, to do with the overthinking and all that stuff, when we go back to my emotional functioning illusion before, when we get into an emotional state, limbically, the rear part of the brain the middle rear part of the brain takes over, and cognition diminishes, because the two don't work in concert very often. So if we're stuck in a fear or an anxiety state, logic doesn't really work super well. So if you're in fear because of something, it's really hard to present logically, say, hey, don't worry, this will pass, it'll blow over. I think we tend to just start to spiral in anxiety, and then we're doing things out of emotion instead of reason. And that's normal, and that's human behavior. We just want to be aware of it so that we can get better control over our choices. There's an old story about, and I know we're coming up on 2:30, so I wanted to give everybody permission. If you need to jump off, go ahead and jump off, because that's usually all we're budgeted for. If you want to reach out to me, you're free to do so. I do this with every presentation I ever give. I give my email address. It's jake@zephyrwellness.org. Shoot me emails. I'll reply down the road. I'm cool with that. But there's an old story. I don't know if it's true or not, but about this kid who was diabetic, and he wouldn't stop eating sugar, and his mom was very concerned. And the only person he really had any love for or would listen to was Gandhi. So she arranged a trip to take him to see Gandhi, and she's saved all her money, flew halfway across the world, got him in front of Gandhi, and said, Mr. Gandhi, please tell my kid to stop eating sugar. He's a diabetic. He's going to kill himself. Gandhi says, all right, come back in 3 days. So they disappear, and 3 days pass, and they come back and meet with him, and he sits in front of the kid, and he says, son, stop eating sugar. And the mom is thankful, and the kid listens, and all is well, and they're going to go about their business. But before they leave, she says, excuse me, if that was all it took, then why did it take 3 days for you to tell him that? He says, because 3 days ago I was still eating sugar. Now, the point of that story is to say that if you're going to tell your kids anything, you yourself better be modeling it, because if you're consistent, you have good credibility. If you're inconsistent, the children will see that, and they're not going to follow what you say. And with that, I would suggest that when you're telling your kids about how to tolerate what's going on, you have to tell them that it's temporary. Everything in life is temporary. Even life itself is temporary, and that's not to cause anxiety in anybody. It's just a statement of fact. So if we can hold loosely to that. We don't have to give over to anxiety and fear about, what is going to happen and how are we going to endure this? Well, you're going to endure it the same way you endured everything that got you up to this point in life, which is you're going to tolerate it and you're going to be okay on the other side, and the world's not going to spin off its axis. Things may be different, things may change, finances ebb and flow, all sorts of things, right? But they're all temporary. And in the end, if you can put yourself in a mental spot that says, we'll be okay, follow my lead, kids, they will follow your path to peace, and they'll believe you because you're standing on that and truly owning it. If you're just mouthing what I say because you listen to some cool guy on a Zoom conference with the chamber, but you don't own it yourself like Gandhi did in that alleged story, then you're not going to be believed and they're not going to listen to you anyway, and then your house is going to be full of chaos and anxiety. So learning to tolerate distress is critical. Knowing that everything is temporary is paramount, and then communicating that message in a calm manner with confidence to your kids is going to help get them through it.
All right, awesome. So, so far I'm not seeing any questions coming in through chat. Jake, have you received any questions on your end?
I have not, but if you privately message me, I will definitely dox you and tell everyone who you are when you ask. I'm just kidding. No, I won't do that. Never do that.
All righty. Well, thanks for that warning. So I went ahead and put Jake's email address in chat. Go ahead and copy and paste that for yourself if you need it to reference later. But since there are no questions, we'll just go ahead and close out with one final question from our prepared set. And this one may be incredibly uncomfortable, but a huge part of the reality that we're facing right now. So the truth is, and you can see it just by looking at your social media feeds every day, if you have social media, that people feel very differently about what's happening right now. A lot of people even feel very differently about whether or not the precautions we've taken to socially distance are necessary or not. And there are a lot of varying opinions. We've always known that parenthood is something that is subject to intense scrutiny amongst other parents, but this is yet another way that parents can often, perhaps intentionally or unintentionally, judge other parents and other families right now. So what recommendations do you have for parents who are looking to set guidelines or practices for their own family, and those guidelines and practices for your family don't line up with those of your kids' friends' families? How do you have those conversations? For instance, if you're perhaps not comfortable with a couple months down the line having your kid go to someone else's house for a sleepover, how do you have that conversation, not just with your kids, but with the other parents involved?
I think that I'm glad you closed with that. So you do need to talk to the other parents. If your kids are hanging out with other kids, you should know who their parents are. That's old school. I'm not going to move off that. To the best of your ability, you should know who your kids' parents are, know where they live, just if for nothing else, emergency contact information, right? Again, I want to go back to what's the decision-making model for any other conflict of parenting philosophy. Maybe you don't agree with your kids' friends' parents' dietary allowances. Maybe you don't like that they eat sugar and your kids don't eat sugar. Maybe that you don't like the language they use, the video games they play, the cell phone usage at a certain age versus another age. I mean, all of this pre-existed COVID-19 and parenting beliefs about exposure and contacts and all that stuff. The same framework should be applied when dealing with differences in parenting regarding this particular issue. And you got to respect people's autonomy. Your family's standards are just that. They're your families. You don't get to go impart them on anybody else. What you do get to do is educate your children, again, with intentionality as to why you believe what you believe in your family. And then that puts you in better charge and ownership of your beliefs. If your beliefs need to be questioned, that's fine. They can be questioned. We can change them. We don't have to. Well-articulated, well-rooted beliefs are the foundation of any good functioning. We just want to know where they come from so that they're not arbitrary or capricious or cause fights or defensiveness when they're laid down. And then over time, if it just so unfolds that you can't have sleepovers, well, then you can't have sleepovers, and that's your family's rule. And again, you can go back to distress tolerance and teaching your kids how to tolerate that. It's not the end of the world. but we have to have confidence in how we communicate our parenting preferences and letting our kids and our neighbors know why we do what we do so that they can get along on the playground. We don't need, epithets thrown around about children's parents from one to the next just because, somebody has a certain belief or somebody has a different belief. It's not appropriate. We need to be instilling enough confidence in our kids that the decisions we make as parents are in their best interest. And then that's where it stops. Let the parents handle that stuff. We shouldn't have adult conversations with our kids anyway, much as we can prevent it. So yeah, I would go back to however you make the decisions you make about any other parenting issue that's of importance, and then resolving any other disagreements. Use that. And one last thing I wanted to touch on, because I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. Given the increase in mental anguish that we've seen, I think that I saw an article about an 891% increase to the federal helpline in the month of March year over year, and that's astronomical. We're all suffering, and we haven't gotten numbers yet, but we know that people are killing themselves with ever increasing frequency. To try to stop that, there's a great resource. It's an organization I'm a part of called Walk the Talk America. And if you go to WTTA.org, you can get a free and anonymous mental health screening. There's 13 different screening tools, 2 of which are in Spanish. And all you do is click through some stuff. It's powered by Mental Health America. It's all confidential. And then it spits out an answer. And this is great for kids because what Mental Health America has reported to us is that roughly 2/3 of the people who take their screenings are under the age of 24. And of those, I think 70% are under the age of 17. Mm-hmm. So a ton of teenagers are taking these screenings. Children really like online tools. It's a free screening. So if you think your kid's struggling, go to WTTA.org, stick them in front of the computer and be like, here, click through these answers and see what your results are, and we can talk about it. Make sure they answer honestly, that kind of thing. It's a great way to get some personal insight. And if you yourselves want to do it, you can do that too. That way you're not just like, I don't know, is this normal? Is this regular? Or am I off? You can have an actual legitimate tool that'll help you go through that process. So it's WTTA.org /love if you want to jump right to the thing, but there's an overlay. Click through it.
Thank you so much. That's an important place to leave the conversation, to remind us all, parents, kids, adults, seniors, whoever, that there are resources available for us, and you're not alone in this. Thank you so much for making yourself available as a resource. Again, Jake's email address is posted in chat right now if you wanted to take note of that. Thanks again for being with us today. We'll definitely have to have you on again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, reach out, ping me. I say it all the time, podcasts and interviews and whatnot. This information doesn't do any good locked up in my head, so it's not proprietary. It needs to be out there so the community can heal. Nevada's 51st in the country behavioral health care. We don't need to live there. Right. Get it out. Spread this stuff around.
Awesome. Well, thank you once again, and I hope everyone on the call is staying safe, remaining healthy, and taking care of themselves and their loved ones.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. Everybody on the call, thanks for your time. It's always humbling to be listened to.
All right. Well, we are happy to do it. So thank you again for being with us. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Take care.